Welcome to Universal Design Stories of Change. This podcast series aims to gather the experiences of persons with disabilities in Norway and internationally in order to gain a greater understanding of the benefits of universal design for persons with disabilities and everyone. We would like to thank the Norwegian Directorate for Children, Youth, and Families for their support, and the amazing team from Inclusive Creation for making it all happen. Enjoy this episode. All right. So, Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat with me. Could you just start off by telling us who you are, what you do, what you enjoy doing?
Sure. No, thank you for having me, George. This is a really nice opportunity to come and talk about what I think is a really important subject. So I'm so glad I have a chance to chat with you today. My name is Dave Collins. You might guess from my accent, I'm not Norwegian. This is my adopted country. I'm from Britain originally, from South Wales, and I've been here 11 years. And my job is I'm an innovation manager. So I work for a research project at NTNU in Norway, a university. I work on a project about zero-emission neighborhoods. And my job is to find ideas and products and services and bring them to the point where they can be exploited in the marketplace. And I have a PhD in architecture. And for fun, I brew beer, I read a lot, I play video games, and I really, really like Monty Python.
Oh, that's amazing. I love it. I love it. I love it. I want to dive in right there to what you were talking about as in terms of innovation. I'm wondering how you see the relationship of an issue like innovation and this topic of inclusive design, or we can call it universal design or accessibility. Is there a connection here? And if so, what does that look like in your world?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a vested interest in this outside of my job because I have dyspraxia. So I'm already a little bit neurologically diverse.
Mm-hmm.
So even long before I was involved in this sort of work, these sorts of ideas have been something that I've always had to think about.
Yeah.
Because I think if you have a physical or learning disability, you are intrinsically in a world that isn't built for you. You know, and I think that there's been a lot of criticism in the news and things recently about the idea, for example, that the world is designed by men, so women don't feel like things are necessarily designed for them because historically men have been the designers. And I think when it comes to disability and accessibility, we have the same challenge, that a lot of things have been designed by people who don't have the challenges. And also, secondly, it's only been recently that this has been a topic that has been, first of all, legally binding to do, and also attractive and sexy. Now, in a way, I would like to see, I have to explain myself correctly when I describe this, otherwise it's going to sound dreadful. I would like to see no universal design, in a way, as a word, because I think that all design should be universal.
Absolutely.
I work in the fields, the field I did my PhD in was facilities management. And 10 years ago, we were talking about facilities management and sustainable facilities management. And I was saying that we shouldn't have that. If we do this right, we shouldn't have sustainable facilities management. All facilities management should be sustainable. And I think that's the case with design as well, that we should make it for humans. We don't make it just for people who are disabled or people who are not disabled. That we should make it for the human condition, which is so broad and that encompasses every kind of physical and mental and learning challenge that may exist. So I think really when it comes to innovation, we have to completely rethink how we start design.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because in my opinion, one of the times when it can go wrong is when we decide in the middle of a project or after a project is done to incorporate universal design afterwards. Because it means you're having it as a bonus or an extra, and dare I even say a luxury, and it should be none of those things. You go to a modern building today, and there's always things like wheelchair access, and it's considered to be an endemic part of the design of a building today. And I'd like to see that in everywhere. I think things like clothing are still not there. And that's kind of how I've ended up being a part of how I ended up getting in contact with you.
Absolutely.
Because a colleague of mine is working on universal design in the context of clothing. Now, that's even more difficult because when it comes to getting into a building, There's only a finite amount of challenges that can stop people getting into a building. You can accommodate most of them, but clothing is even more individual. That we don't just make, one black t-shirt and everybody wears a black t-shirt. Everybody has different, even if you've not got a neurodiverse condition, you like different patterns and colors and lengths of t-shirt, and some people can't bear to wear trousers or whatever. So already, even before we discuss the bigger universal design picture, we have a problem in making things for individuals. So I think that, I say, my colleague Maureen is working very hard on trying to make clothing more accessible to people with neurodiverse conditions. And it's so important because it's so difficult to get right because of the D word, the diversity, the neurodiverse. Diversity is our biggest challenge.
Yeah. And I think, it's such unexplored territory to think about the world around us, whether it is architecture, whether it is clothing, technology, in terms of neurodiversity. So I'm wondering if you have a hot take on this issue. Where could businesses go, or what should they start thinking about in order to create a more accessible world for people who are neurodiverse?
I think, in first of all, you should maybe speak to the people who are going to use the things that you create. I think that's part of the problem, and it's where I mentioned earlier about that so many things for people with disabilities are designed by able-bodied people, and so many things in this world are made by men for women, and that's fine in a way. But you have to talk to the people with disabilities, or talk to the people, or talk to women, or even better, have people with disabilities design these things, and have women designing these things. Because I think, I work in the field of architecture, and the thing is, if you make a dog's house, it could have solar panels on it. It could be made of phase change materials. If a dog can't get in it and sleep, it's a rubbish dog house. It doesn't matter how zero emission you've made this thing, right? And that's, to me, the core of universal design is if you create something and don't think of the person that could use it. So businesses need to speak. I mean, if you could create an office building and you want universal design to be incorporated in that, talk to the people that work in your current building. Talk to the people that ask what they like and what they don't like. Ask the people what is the most difficult thing about them. And it's, of course, the things that we think of automatically, things like wheelchair access. But we don't always talk about is people who maybe are on the autistic spectrum who find open plan offices really, really difficult. So people are very sensitive to even low noise. And there are people who post-COVID have never come back to the office because they just can't cope. And that's not their fault. That's the fault of their workplace. And whilst we can forgive employers for not knowing it up to this point, I don't think we can forgive them now. Because I think because of COVID, we're all more aware than we ever have been about what makes us comfortable in our environments. People without disabilities now know the nuances of what they like and don't like. And I think we now need to think like that for everybody.
I'm wondering, that it's actually a brilliant, brilliant response. I'm wondering, something that's come up in previous interviews has been this issue of ego-driven design and how that can act as a barrier to inclusive design. And so, when you find some of these designers who think in their own world that they have this kind of magical kind of touch that makes their work somehow set apart and that it should go unquestioned. So bringing in users or bringing in people that might be antagonistic to their vision is seen as a negative thing in a lot of respects. What do you say to that? How would you argue around that?
I think that we have one of the most awful things you can hear when you design something is the word "I want" from the designer, right? I want my building to look like this. I want my building to be low energy. But you're probably not going to use that building. And also, you're probably building it for somebody else. You're probably not building it for you. You've got a client that is paying you to do this. And I mean, the culture is really changing, which is good to hear. But there's an author called Stuart Brand who helped to organize Woodstock, actually. And he did a book on buildings in the 90s, and he told a really interesting story about talking to an architect who built a building. And he said to the architect, the building was, say, 5 years old, and he said to the architect, have you asked the people in the building what they think of it? And he said, oh gosh, I don't ask the users. It's too disheartening.
Wow,
There's
that's
your ego-driven design problem right there. Is this guy made a building he was happy with and walked away. And walked away. I mean, it is changing. I mean, in some of the work I've done over the years, we have had buildings where the designer has remained on site
yep.
for some time afterwards. And I think if you're going to have inclusive design as a part of a building from the minute that it's designed, having the designer on site afterwards is perfect. Because when you build anything, you can't think of every possibility. So the reason that you have with software is you have beta and alpha versions is because designers design something and they let users work out the stuff that they couldn't work out themselves. And who better to work out universal design challenges than the people who are going to most need it? What I read once was there was an office building that had a disabled toilet. The toilet wasn't disabled; it was a toilet for people with disabilities. The toilet was fine; it worked. And what happened was they found out that that toilet only worked for people who could get out of their wheelchairs to sit on the toilet. The people who had to rotate their wheelchairs themselves in that room, it didn't have the space.
Yeah.
You had to be very, very small and very, very thin and have a very, very lean wheelchair for that room to work. But they only found that out afterwards, and they based the design of that room on, I think, some kind of regulation that existed. Okay. But then they made the change to that bathroom because people who use the bathroom said, we can't use it.
Yep.
And that's an example of a success story. And then there was a lot of goodwill because the designers put their hands up and they said, we got it wrong, we will change it, and this is the reason why we're spending a year visiting this building regularly.
Wow. I've heard the same story with elevators as well. People were able to get in with a wheelchair into the elevator, but then the controls are behind them and not able to turn around and use the controls in the elevator. So there's it seems to be a common occurrence, at least in that specific issue.
Ableist design is a huge problem, and I have a neurodiverse condition. So, like, for example, if I designed a building myself, I would love the possibility, because I'm currently in a tiny little room that we can hire just for these sorts of things. And I quite like for a little bit of the day just to have silence and block out the world and be in a room like this. So for my needs, if I designed a building, I would have rooms like this. But because I'm not a wheelchair user, I'm not blind, that doesn't automatically qualify me to make the same decisions for people who have those challenges. And to me, that's an ableist problem. And unless you have an architect or a designer that has every single disability in the world, and that's never going to happen, you're going to need to have to accept for post-occupancy adjustments. Because like you said, I'm sure when they designed that elevator, they thought about the size to get wheelchairs in and out and thought of all these things. But then probably for a very innocent reason, they didn't consider the placement of the controls.
Yeah.